Disclaimer, Brian and I are not mental health professionals.
Please note that the content discussed in this podcast episode is for entertainment purposes only and should not be considered a substitute for professional medical advice, diagnosis, or treatment. Cassie and I are not mental health professionals. The opinions expressed in this episode are based on our personal experiences and biases.
If you or someone you know is experiencing mental health issues, we strongly recommend seeking assistance from qualified professionals. Consult with a licensed therapist, psychiatrist, or other mental health experts to address your specific concerns. They can provide personalized guidance, diagnosis, and treatment options tailored to your needs.
We will post mental health resources in our show notes down below. And now enjoy the episode. All right, welcome back to the Older Public Podcast. Today we're going to be diving into some territory that we've dipped our toes into a few times on the podcast, Cassia, and that is tackling some aspects of mental health and how they compare to Star Wars and different films. Now, we've talked about this a couple of times, right, Cassie? We talked about it back on episode 99 that we had on the 501st Help Instagram account. They came on and talked to us about some mental health there. So go back and check out that. That was a really great conversation, I thought. And then you and I, Cassie, did an Inspired a Galaxy episode number 146 where we talked about I believe it was a book that you'd read about movies and how they can affect your mental health, and we kind of talked about that book a little bit, and just about some of our movies that we found helped us with our mental health and got us mentally refreshed and things like that. And those were both really great conversations. But you found someone to come on the podcast to talk with us about this subject again. And I think it's going to be a great conversation, and how mental health and Star Wars and how they're intertwined and interwoven. And I think it's going to be great. So, Cassia, who did you bring on the podcast today?
Yeah, I brought on my friend Ian. We went to university together. We were, in
Mhm.
fact, in a team in our screenwriting class. So it's great to have you on, Ian.
Yeah.
We've name dropped you a few times on the podcast talking about the Star Wars trilogy pattern that you kind of told me about. Can you
Yeah.
introduce yourself and what you do?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, we met long ago at university. Oh boy, that writing group was a lot of fun, sharing our screenplays and helping each other.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was a lot of fun. I remember so much about that time. It was a great time. So I've moved on from there. I happened to meet my wife Megan through that class, but the previous semester of it. And so she's a writer photographer these days. She's doing her own writing and photography. But me, I flipped my minor that was in film and writing and film. I wasn't getting the attention towards the writing that I wanted, but I always had in my back belt psychology, because I just loved, like, I felt that it would make me a better writer about characters, and I saw it everywhere, right? Like I saw um just people using this idea of psychology and even mental health, like, oh, like this can help people, that it will help them find peace. We can feel it in the music, we can feel it in the cinematography of how things move on the screen, and then just how they're written, the characters, and how the actors portray it. And so I flipped it to psychology, and I graduated actually in social science, my bachelor's, and then I finished here just this year my master's in psychology counseling. I had It didn't take me that long. What happened was I took a hiatus. I took 5 years with my bachelor's, and I practiced as a family support worker up here in Canada, where you get paid more in mental health. and and then I was like, okay, I'm gonna try and get into some other programs, and they were very competitive. And I finally got into one with my older sister, which was really cool, because I did the master's with my older sister. We finished together, and now I am practicing as a family therapist. How the licensing and certification works, though, some of my hours, I'm waiting to get paid. You have to go through not getting paid and waiting on that, and taking out more student loans. And so my wife is using her amazing photography business. I practice in family therapy. That's a long introduction for myself, but yeah, I also still just movies just end up being a part of my life. I still just love them, and it's a very easy conversation to have with people.
Yeah, thank you so much for coming on. We're excited to have you on.
Yeah. been a while. I've wanted to be on for a while, and it's just been my schedule to match up.
Yeah, it finally worked out, and I think it's great to have a family therapist on the pod because I don't know, Star Wars, it's kind of like a big family soap opera
Mm,
shindig going on
mm,
in all the trilogies.
yeah, it's definitely yeah, like we all have families. Like my mom was adopted, and so people will be like, "Oh, no, no, some people don't have families." No, you do have families. They're people who love you. And so even in the newest stuff, right, people might criticize it and, "Oh, she's not a Skywalker." Well, the people that end up finding love with, they see that this is a dip into that toe of the family therapy. That Rey, in a way, exactly becomes adopted into this family lineage. So, yeah.
Which trilogy do you think it works best to talk about Star Wars
Mm.
from that perspective, from like
Well,
original trilogy or prequel trilogy?
so in my opinion, the best place to start is, and this is even how I prefer the viewing. Everybody always has those posts on like, this is how you should view the Star Wars trilogies or whatever. I believe you start, how they were released, 4, 5, 6, 1, 2, 3, 7, 8, 9, because then you can see this momentum of like even George Lucas understanding more and more of what he's writing about. Because like even by Return of the Jedi, we as an audience suddenly are like, wait a second, this is about family. Vin Diesel, that's probably what happened. He was a little boy. I gotta help write about this someday.
Yeah.
Write his own story. Family, yeah. He just wanted to. After the first one was out, okay, now make sure it's about family, just like Return of the Jedi. I don't know if you would like me to explain a little bit about systemic constructionism, which is the framework and theory that I use with clients. Would that be advantageous or?
Yeah, go for it.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely.
So kind of how I can best explain this, and it's not like I sit down with clients and explain this, but so if we were as to be the professionals that are going to understand the Skywalkers, let's say they come in and we're the three therapists, right? Like I might be the main therapist who's seeing them, and you two are my consultants, and we're going to sit down. We're going to be like, okay, I have my first session with them, so that's probably why it would be Luke first, right? Like he came in. We would start with the framework of it, which, like I said, systemic constructionism. It's social constructionism that's the framework, and social constructionist itself was its creation is seen as something that came around in the late 1800s by multiple authors. And the idea assumes that every individual has a sense of self that is socially constructed and produced by interactions with others around them, making it like kind of imperative for therapists and mental health professionals to use precise methods to help these clients that come in, these families, analyze their own socio-cultural material. So what I mean by that is that just everything came from something. And what we believe it comes from is something social, right? That people were talking about it, right?
Mhm.
And so how you're going to find out what that is, the framework. So imagine it like a house. You're going to imagine that the beams that you're going to be putting up, you're going to be like, okay, this is a structure, right? So the first question you'll ask, which constructionism is very important. That's about questions. So the most important and first question you always ask, even in therapy, but even towards looking at a building, is what is this going to be? So with Luke Skywalker coming in, it's almost like, okay, what's going on? That's what you'd ask Luke, right? Like, hey, what's going on? And so that's kind of the framework that you always build off of. So the moment that you're like, oh, I don't know what to do, you need to ask questions, right? You need to be like, wait a second, I don't understand. It's very important that anything you fall back on in constructionism is that you say something like, I'm confused. Can you answer a question for me? And you need to find the right question. So you can screw up a lot, but you need to find this sense, like the direction of self is all these kind of boards around the house, right? So like we should always be asking questions, like we're confused, right? Like, wait a second. So the first movie, we're introduced to his aunt and uncle. So we would, of course, ask the question, where's his parents, right? But we need to ask that in a proper therapeutic way, right? You can't just be like, where the heck's your dad, Luke?
Yeah.
We would ask, who's your family? Like, you tell me about your family is a good question. But usually that first question, like I said, though, is what are you coming in for? So that's kind of the framework. And then inside of that framework, though, to explain like the direction that we're always going to go, like I said, towards another question is like, tell me about your family. So inside is the theory of the framework, and that's family systems theory. And family systems theory, a good way to explain that, in a modest way, the systems theory it like assesses any kind of person in the world. Everyone comes from a family. Everyone has parental figures and some form of indoctrinating authority in their life. Therefore, the theory suggests an importance in finding out how individuals maintain and differentiate themselves with or against the influence of others, and how they predictably function as products of systems they subscribe to, whether willingly or not, right? So, Luke himself, he has other systems, and we know this in the Skywalker legacy, right? Like he has the rebellion he hears about, right? Or the Jedi, or he hears about the Empire. And we're even confused sometimes. Does he want to join the Empire? Is that where Biggs and Tank went? We should be asking those questions, right? Like we're kind of like, huh? As an audience, George Lucas wrote it in a very way that he throws you into it. And so, the best thing to do is ask questions. And you're like, wait a second, does he want to be a stormtrooper? What does he want to be? Could he become a bad guy? Who's the rebellion? What are those people? So this was formed in like the 1950s by Dr. Murray Bowen, is the most popular one. But the overall theory's invitation is for clinicians, so mental health professionals, like we would all be assuming right now, is to look at like the Skywalkers and to notice and reflect upon how every individual in this family or other families is influenced and matured through specific characteristics and dynamics of their family of origin. So it is actually important for us inside of this framework, these questions, for us to kind of push Luke to figure this out. It's a healthy thing, as much as everybody's like, like his uncle and his aunt are like, oh dear, don't tell him about his dad, right? Probably not a good thing, right? We should let him choose. We shouldn't let him find this out on his own, but they love him and they don't understand this, and families are messy. They're not professionals, and professionals would screw up as well. So with that in mind, thereby we're going to investigate the inner workings and reactionary bias of Luke and the other individuals that might come in. So if we go to the prequel trilogy, we might meet up with that could be an outside perspective, right? It could be Obi-Wan Kenobi. It could be like he's brought in as a support, right, for the family, or it's Anakin himself, maybe, right? But we're just going to kind of like we're going to just investigate this, of what's going on and their bias and stuff like that, and their group connections or their separations as well, from whatever that origin or original family was. So are you two ready? Should we like consult on this? Is that what you think would be?
Yeah.
You guys ready to go forward?
Yeah,
I'm
absolutely.
down.
Let's do it.
Awesome. So let's imagine like the most common question that happens in family therapy is family, like if it's a whole family that comes in, they'll always, the most popular question is like, are we doing it right? Is what they always ask. But if we start with an individual like Luke coming in, like I said, his question like that we would ask and that he'd be wanting us to figure out is, what's wrong with me, right? Like, I don't know what's up with me. So I'll just tell you, like, this is how this is, right? So I met with him. I'll tell you that, guys. And you might ask the question, okay, well, what did he share? What did the client share? And I say, well, so Cassia and Brian, I thought it was very interesting. He says that his aunt and uncle have never truly told him who his dad is. They say that he was a spice freighter and that like he was working on a spice freighter and all this stuff. But then he says that he met up with one of his neighbors who he kind of has always thought he was a little bit crazy, and this neighbor flat out told him that his uncle and aunt are lying to him, right? Like that's just your uncle talking, right? And he told him, and this guy's kind of a hermit. He said, no, your dad went on adventures with me. He was a Jedi. So as a consulting group, we probably, it depends on you guys. Like how do you want to investigate this? What would you be curious about as a consultant?
I guess how reputable is this information coming from Obi-Wan Kenobi? Did they have shared family history? Is he trustworthy?
Yeah, it's funny. You're right. Like that's a great question. Like Luke seems to really trust him. He believes him a lot. And also just like the aunt and uncle know him too, and they seem to have been in a bit of a feud with him to stay away from Luke. So Luke does believe that this is the kind of thing he's been looking for because his parents are yeah, he knows nothing about them. He knows nothing about his mother. They don't even talk about his mother. They say that they have no idea who she was. So
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
I don't know. So I'm kind of like, okay, this was the first session, and he's coming in because I said what was the matter, and he shared this with me, but like his overall thing was he's like, what should I do? Should I believe my aunt and uncle, or like he was a spice freighter and I should help my uncle on the farm, or should I go out and be a Jedi like Ben's talking? And I don't know what questions do you have, Brian?
I guess I would probably want to know, I guess, then in this situation, what other sort of aspects of his relationship he has with his aunt and uncle. Uh,
Mhm.
who are they, and how has his upbringing with them been?
Yeah, uh, he he finds the upbringing pretty boring. He doesn't like the farm. He wants to break free. Um, yeah, it's just kind of strange. He wants to just get away from that life. It's just not interesting to him. He loves them, but he seems to be compelled to just get away, and so he's not really talking too much about that. He wants to know just like about all these mysteries. He's just way too curious about this. So I don't know. What do you think would be like good questions that we should ask Luke to proceed forward?
I guess what does he want in his future?
Hmm.
Like because he's kind of like 19, maybe he can think about like getting an education if he wants to get off of Tatooine. Maybe he can find a way that uh of getting off and kind of continuing his life that his aunt and uncle would approve of.
Yeah. So obviously we can. So I'm going to jump out of this little consultant thing here because obviously we all know the answers, right? Like we can proceed forward with like
Hmm.
how this might be looked at, right? Like okay, so we get into the system of his different options, right? Like the Empire or this or that. But like the fascinating thing about like the mental health thing of where we could see that George Lucas wrote this, that people need to understand this um, on a systems level. If we're to explore this, there's a lot of questions that you as an audience come in and ask. So we all are always like, wait a second, like, are the Empire bad? And we're showing these different perspectives. So we're like an audience, like consultants, we would know. We're basically told the Empire's bad. So but you can't really like absolutely tell a client, like you can't sit there and be like, yeah, that's a bad road for you to go on. So in many ways, George Lucas wrote this that you're still trying to figure out the Empire. You're still trying to be like, is this good? Is this bad? And I feel like, I don't know, what do you guys think? Like do they ever have enough conversation about in Star Wars? Like, did George Lucas make it that you absolutely are like, maybe I should join the Empire?
I kind of assumed, and maybe Brian might have assumed differently, but that Luke kind of just would want to join the Empire so he could learn how to fly and then join the rebellion. What did you think, Brian?
As far as him going out, yeah, I don't know because we don't learn too much about the school that his friends have gone off to go to, and you get the interaction then with Obi-Wan Kenobi, where it says of course he wants to fight the Empire, he hates them, so I don't know. Yeah, if the getting off was a means to an end, or what this particular flight school was, or even if it was necessarily an Imperial flight school. So,
Yeah.
yeah, it's a little ambiguous, I suppose, kind of through that front section. But I don't think that it was really that veiled to us, the viewer. Seeing the Empire in the kind of opening shot to
Yeah.
start the movie up. But from Luke's perspective, I mean, it doesn't seem like he grappled with that too much. Like I said, just in
Yeah.
that interaction that he had with Obi-Wan. But yeah, I suppose that it is kind of thinly veiled as to his motivation and desire to want to get out of town and get off the farm, so to speak.
Yeah, yeah, it's funny because obviously we're following the heroic journey here. And so it should have a pattern of that the least confusing thing is what we choose, right? So in many ways, that's exactly where, a systemic constructionism is going to find, is that the most fulfilling answers that you provoke out of somebody, like that's what they should inevitably decide themselves. And so if we're confused, then, as an audience, we're confused, just like as a consulting group of therapists, you'd be like, okay, well, why don't you help him like discover what isn't confusing in his life? So obviously it's so funny that we get, like thrust into this, but Luke is still, he's like bored of like being a farmer, and that would be the least confusing. And that's why, if he were to return home after that, we might be like, well, maybe you should go confront your aunt and uncle about it, right? That'd probably be the best thing that we would tell him, right? Like, do you think you should talk to them? Maybe, how would you imagine that going? So he goes home, right? And they're dead. So he's thrust into it. So in many ways, if we had another session with him, he'd probably be crying, and he'd be like, they're dead. I can't even do anything. And it's like, well, what do you think you want to do? And like, he'd probably be like, I want to go. I want to figure out these questions through the only person that I can trust right now. And you'd be like, are you sure you can trust him? I've heard about their religion. It takes up your life. It's a life decision, from just a mental health standpoint of where I'm just coming out here. For anybody who watches Star Wars, the invitation of it, and this is getting really deep. I know this is probably going in a direction we don't want this to go, but I just mean it on the level of like how it's written is that it invites the audience not to be confused. You're given a lot of questions and you're given a lot of space, but there's a lot of answers to everything that happens to him, that he directs himself against confusion. So mental health is not about confusion. And I wonder what you guys think about that.
Yeah, for sure. That makes a lot of sense to me. As far as mental health, because to me, when I think of that, I think it's, about coming to some sort of, clarity or clarification for, kind of your own internal thought processes and things like that. So yeah, so definitely kind of a not a path of least resistance, but kind of opening the door of the most direct path, I guess maybe.
Yeah, the most direct. Yeah, like that. It's you don't want to completely throw your anybody in with mental health or a movie and be like, what the heck did I just watch? Like there's several directors who do that. I'm trying to remember the movie. Do you remember this, Cassia, the Tree of Life movie with Brad Pitt that came out, that they provoked a lot of people at the university to watch, and we were like, what?
Yeah.
Did I just watch?
Yeah. I guess like that's a good point, because Star Wars is kind of like a fairy tale, and you can impart a lot of like truths simply in even like a narrative like a fairy tale. And I think like even though Star Wars grapples with a lot, sometimes there's not as much gray in the episodes, I think that can be a good thing.
Yeah. But I like that you talk about that there's the fairy tale element to it, because it always introduces ourselves, like how George wrote it in this way. The heroic journey should be pretty straightforward, but its second act, and I think we've talked about this before, Cassia, is that like Empire Strikes Back is the exact second act it should be, because it has several elements that are like that movie, like I mentioned, Tree of Life, that you're like, wait a second, it's under interpretation. For instance, like Brian, I wonder what your interpretation is of like what happens in Empire. That might be the most confusing. Maybe there's other confusing things, but Luke's vision that he has in the tree. What's your interpretation?
I think my interpretation, I don't know, and it's probably skewed, right? Because I would have seen Empire the first time as I don't know, like a 4-year-old, 5-year-old, something like that. So the takeaway, but I think now if I just kind of picture that, I just see it as Luke, kind of seeing himself going down this path that's ultimately going to leave in his own kind of self-destruction. That's how I see it.
Yeah, like he sees Darth Vader as pure destruction or something like that. But then like I've heard other people say things like oh, if he goes down this path, this maybe is tied into Return of the Jedi, but people who hadn't seen Return of the Jedi yet, right? Like in the 80s, they hadn't seen it. It hadn't come out yet. It's 1980 and they watched it and they were just flat out like, what the heck?
Mhm.
What? And then by the end of the movie, they were like, oh, so he fears becoming like his father, right? Like that might be one interpretation. Like, oh, but he didn't know that that's what he was seeing. Maybe that's how they might understand it. What about you, Cassia? Like, what did you, when you see that, how you translate it?
Yeah, I think that's a scene that like constantly gets recontextualized. Like the more I like when I saw 4, 5, and 6. I mean, I was a kid, so like some of the things went over my head, but then when you kind of see 1, 2, and 3, and then kind of like the whole Star Wars like 1 through 6, it's it was constantly kind of like recontextualizing itself. But what I kind of see is like when you're fighting someone else, or when you kind of like put your energy into fighting others, like what you're really doing in some ways is hurting yourself.
Oh, I love that. Yeah. Like there's so many ways to interpret it. Yeah, it's interesting. Like we can all pull it out in different ways. Like he's just fighting himself. And it seems like that Yoda even leans towards that, right? Because he tells him, your weapons, you won't need them. Stop thinking that that's what you're going to do, is that you're just going to fight. Like who knows? Like there's so many interpretations of it that are in there. And I think that's very much how mental health goes, is that you don't want confusion, but confusion inevitably happens.
Yeah.
That the more family you bring into the system, the more you're going to uncover that, what's the problem? I don't know what the problem is. Help me. I'm desperate. Just like with the whole family coming in, they say, are we even doing this right? Are we screwing up our family? Like, what are we doing? But like individuals come in, and if I work on a system with them, they really do, like, we may have a first session, like first episode, Star Wars, that it's like, oh, okay. And they feel vamped up and they feel, okay, I don't know who my parents are, but I feel like I'm getting answers. I'm feeling like I'm finding my place in the world. And then they'll just be like slapped with something. It comes up every time. And it's always like, what the heck was that? Like, I don't know. And then, you get your arm chopped off, somebody really hurts you, and you're still confused. And you're like, wait, they're my dad? I don't know.
Yeah. Wait, they're my dad, and also people still just keep lying to me about
Yeah.
who I am
Obi-Wan
and who my
keeps on
parents are.
telling things from a certain point of view.
Yeah. Oh no, I love that you bring that up. It's interesting when you look that up for Return of the Jedi. Like we move on to that very quickly. Like George Lucas had to consult. He did. You can look this up. He consulted a psychologist, and he said, like, what would be the concern with this story? And the psychologist told him, you need to have another person confirm the truth. And that's why Yoda. I always wondered this as a kid. I was like, why do we need to hear this? And I don't think that it is unnecessary. I think it is proper that he did that, because as much as I was a kid that was like, I just want to get them, like fighting, we needed this breather that even in therapy, you should go and find more support in your life. Like you got your hand chopped off, and like you said, Cassia, that like, what the heck, man? You lied to me. And even he's like, Ben, why didn't you tell me? And he's almost even more aggravated in Return of the Jedi when he sees him, right? He's like, you told me this. And he's like, from a certain point of view, that is true. And from the Obi-Wan Kenobi series that they're adding on, which is kind of interesting, they do show that from a certain point of view, even Anakin saw it that way. I did kill myself.
Yeah.
I am, like I am this twisted monster, and you should not trust me to be your father. Like I am Vader. I am more Vader than I am Anakin. I am more an addict. If I were to look at what's going on with Vader, you guys might interpret it differently. I don't know if we were consulting, like, what would you see Darth Vader as? I would see him as like, he's an addict father.
Well, real quick, just to go back to what you said about Yoda and how you had to have someone confirm that to Luke. The audience also needed someone to confirm that, because it's left on that cliffhanger for 3 years.
Yeah, absolutely.
For people to know. So I mean, it's closure for the audience as much as it is for Luke in that instance. But to go back to this question, how do we view Darth Vader? I don't know. I don't know that I would say necessarily that he has like an addictive personality. I don't really see um that. I do think that he has some sort of fixating
Mm,
issues on things. And that's I guess unfortunately that's, through the lens of, kind of knowing the story and seeing that. So if I try to just dial it down to what we know about Darth Vader through kind of the original trilogy, I don't know. I don't see him as really any kind of a father because we don't see him doing any sort of fatherly things until
yeah.
the very tail end of Return of the Jedi. So yeah, if I try to strip away the extra stuff that we know about Darth Vader and just think about what on what we get in episodes 4, 5, and 6,
Yeah, yeah.
there's not a lot of parenting he does other than he says come with me and we can overthrow the Emperor. So maybe he's
Yeah.
a selfish father, I guess, maybe in that sense.
Yeah, I like that. I like that because I mean he does say like we'll rule the galaxy, which sounds like nuts, right? Like it sounds like weird, like you're ruling the galaxy. So that's why I see it as almost like addiction to power. But I like where you're coming off at, like because it's like, well, okay, I don't know if what you're talking about is almost like a codependency or something like that that he's got, or he's just I don't know. Yeah. Maybe I'm misunderstanding what you're saying, but I like where you're going. It brought up thoughts in my mind, but
I think like what Luke knows is not a whole lot because I don't think like Obi-Wan Kenobi, even though he's a good person, like was very forthcoming and
uh-huh.
Yoda less forthcoming. I think they didn't want to burden him, and maybe there was a better way to handle that, but we're human. Well, I mean, Yoda's not human, but like metaphorically, we're only human and we make mistakes. But I guess I kind of see Vader as kind of an absent father,
Yeah.
uh, a bit of an
Neglect. Yeah.
enigma. And in a way, that's kind of why we need the prequel trilogy to kind of see Anakin as more of a character, I
Hmm.
think. Because all
Yeah.
we kind of see is him at his, he was evil, 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 and then kind of sees like the Emperor torturing Luke, and he's like, I don't want patterns to repeat themselves. I'm
Yeah.
going to save Luke, like I kind of failed Padme. And I used to
Yeah.
always think that Anakin felt like he succeeded at the end and was very triumphant, but I think he was kind of sad as he died. Like even though he did get to save his son, like it was kind of too late for them to really be a family.
Mm.
But maybe Luke can be the Jedi he couldn't be, and he has a sister.
Yeah, I think you're right because he gives an invitation at the end, right? He's like, tell your sister that you were right. It's not remember me that I was a good dad or like that I did something right, or tell your sister that I'm a really good guy. It's like tell your sister this, right? Like make it the family, the support again. Like, yeah, he doesn't have anything. I like that sadness part that you're talking about. And I like, Brian, too, your invitation of like, hey, this is all we have is this trilogy. And it's funny because George Lucas, went back, and people are very critical that he went back, but he goes back in a way, in my opinion, so that you can watch the original trilogy and get some answers about Vader's character, because they had Ian McDiarmid come in and they added more dialogue with him as the Emperor. That he says, like the son of Skywalker, and he's like, how is this possible, right? Like they added um, James Earl Jones added that line, right? How is this possible? Search your feelings, Vader. You'll know it's true. And so, in some ways, that almost makes it seem like that he can't be neglectful. Not to counteract what you said, Cassia, because I like that. But it's almost like if we're to look at this therapeutically. But wait a second, this part, he's not neglectful. He had no idea that he had a son nor a daughter. Even in the moment in Return of the Jedi, he's like, "Wait, you have a sister?" You know, these things are still being hidden from him. He was maybe a part of an abusive relationship, right? Which is probably why I interpret it as an addict or anything like that. But maybe it is also a codependent relationship that he keeps on looking towards. Yeah, I don't. That's that almost does lean us right in. Like Return of the Jedi flows very much like the prequel movies do, in my opinion. It has a
Yeah.
lot going on, and it almost does very quickly push us towards having to watch the prequels. because we're like, dang it, who was this guy? Who was this terrible father? Like, Luke deserves to know who was this guy. That, and you're right, Cassia, that it's like he probably wasn't that bad. He had something bad happened to him. So like, what was it? And that's probably where we would go with like, like maybe somebody else needs to be brought in. We'd say to Luke, we'd say, could you bring Obi-Wan in? Could he talk to us? And that's why I actually see that it's not Anakin's story of the prequels. It really is Obi-Wan. It's different. Well, what do you guys think?
It kind of seems like the Phantom Menace is Qui-Gon's story,
Yeah.
and then kind of looking at Attack of the Clones from a hero's journey perspective, it kind of seems like you could see it from Obi-Wan and Anakin's point of view, but
Yeah.
Anakin's plot in Attack of the Clones is more of a romance plot,
Yeah.
so like most of the plot is handled by Obi-Wan.
Yeah.
Attack of the Clones, I think, is a little easier to kind of split it out, whereas you could view it as either Anakin's movie or Obi-Wan's movie.
Yeah.
I think probably the same too for Revenge of the Sith, but I almost think that Obi-Wan might take over the lead and that become his story more so in Revenge of the Sith, actually. We're gonna get into that when we talk through our hero's journey cycles there. So we'll have lots of good conversation there. But yeah, I could definitely see the argument for saying that the prequels are as much about the character journey and development of Obi-Wan Kenobi as it is about Anakin Skywalker. We don't even meet Anakin, for the first, third of the first movie, and by the last third of the last movie, he's no longer Anakin Skywalker. So,
yeah, it's probably people's criticism of the prequels, but I think that I think there's that's a hard thing to sit there and be like, the whole original trilogy is all Luke's story, because truthfully, he's not the first person that's introduced on screen. And that's probably why when George Lucas was editing the movie himself before his wife was brought in, that he had that Luke was the main character looking up in his binoculars, right? He really did want that to be the adventures of Luke Skywalker, but he wasn't understanding an edit that we understand things on, of like, even in therapy, right? That you're like, I just don't understand my life. Like, I'm confused, because not every person, I would say nobody, has all the full details of their life, right? They need to have somebody brought in, multiple people brought in, and then multiple assumptions brought in too, right? Like, I heard once, and I love this. My wife actually says it all the time. The past is a foreign country. We're strangers in it, right? And we need to find some help to figure it out. We can't just be like, oh, this foreign country, we can speak our own language, right? Like, we need to find somebody who spoke that language. So her mom is actually a very world-renowned historian. This is no joke, guys. I kid you not. She's an Emmy award-winning historian, and she'll love this. When I'll let her know about this podcast, because I'm always like, my Emmy award-winning mother-in-law. She'll be like, "Shut up!" And
I didn't know that either.
Yeah, she's very Sue Hardy Veerhoff. She's amazing, and she did a documentary with a group that won an Emmy for their Vietnam documentary. But she's still incredible, and she does her historian work in Atlanta, Georgia. But just to explain that about her, what's neat is that she's always saying that she needs to find somebody, the last surviving person, even if they're the one that can remember somebody who told them that. So whenever, when she's done stuff about the Civil War, she's actually tried to find people who heard the story, who had it passed down, even though you'll be like, well, that's hearsay. Like, she still wants it. She wants to get as much as she can from multiple aspects of the story. So that's why I think people are hard on the prequels, because George is like, hey, I'll bring in lots of different narratives. And you kind of have to be like, for me, when I watch it and I watch Obi-Wan, you can trust a lot of like what's brought in. And so in almost a consulting fashion of us being like, let's find the family. Like I told you, a family's not just the blood related. It's people who treated you like, your parental figures. And that's definitely Obi-Wan. So if he's brought in to understand Vader, in the past, even though Qui-Gon, told him things. It's funny because the prequels flow in a way that Obi-Wan thinks that he's fulfilling Qui-Gon's wishes, but he completely bows to the views of the Jedi Council, which Qui-Gon never would have done.
Yeah.
So his past as a support to bring in to understand Darth Vader would be very skewered, right? We'd be like, oh, okay, so you tried to do this and then he betrayed you? Like, are you sure that that's what he did? Are you sure, like, are you sure that he wanted that lightsaber to be for his son? Like, he didn't even know that he had a son. Why was it harmful to tell Vader that he had a child? And so, yeah, bringing in like somebody that's very, very much that's probably what we would have to do is he's like the one storyteller, whereas Qui-Gon, it's like, I guess we could bring him in, but he doesn't know anything after. So, and then Anakin, he's probably like, well, he's dead just like Obi-Wan, but he's not too willing. I don't know. But
maybe we get Force ghosts and we can consult them, like the Oracle at Delphi, or is it Delphi? I always said Delphi, but yeah.
But like, who were the most? That's what I always look at, and that's why I believe that the best person to bring in would be Obi-Wan. Still, is because he really was there for the majority of it. You really are always like, wait, where's Obi-Wan? You almost like feel that way as you watch the films. Where's Obi-Wan?
Yeah, especially in Revenge of the Sith. But yeah, Obi-Wan's journey with Anakin in the prequels, he's kind of like, he does go along with the council in a lot of ways, and he's like, Qui-Gon, why can't you just see the council thinks that this 9-year-old boy is going to cause problems, but then they kind of make up, but and then it's kind of like the Jedi Council's like, oh, Qui-Gon died, we'll train him, but like, Obi-Wan, you're gonna have to do it, so have fun with that, you're totally ready. So it's kind of like Obi-Wan is like doing it, but it's kind of more out of obligation than I think like true desire. And I kind of think like Obi-Wan, while he was kind of like a parental figure, he kind of more, he gets on more with Anakin like a brother, but Anakin was looking for a father.
Yeah.
And I think that Palpatine kind of capitalized on Qui-Gon's absence and was able to manipulate Anakin towards his own ends. And I mean, Padme, I would say Obi-Wan and Padme, I would have them there. I would consult both of them, but maybe Padme doesn't quite see the whole picture. Maybe she doesn't want to see some things quite as clearly, but maybe Obi-Wan is a better resource.
Yeah. What do you think, Brian?
Yeah, no, I think definitely those two, and yeah, I think Obi-Wan probably would be the best resource, because it's hard to say with Padme, because they don't spend an entirely large amount of time together, and she's also kind of dealing with her own sort of hang-ups about the relationship and having to keep it secret and things like that too. So I think that they're both kind of similar in that instance there. But yeah, I think Obi-Wan is definitely the one that you're going to have to bring in to learn more about kind of the actions through the prequels there.
Yeah, so like I was saying, almost the flow of this, like for the original series, is you're always wanting answers to confusion. So that's like the first stage of therapy, right? Like, you're inviting questions about the family that move away from confusion. And then the next layer of this, like I said, with the prequels, is that you're wanting to invite support in, right, to help the confusion. So a lot of people will end up, fighting with themselves if they're individual with the family systems, this theory. So it is very helpful to bring somebody in and say, even for a little bit of time, and be like, hey, could you fill Luke in about what happened? And so you want to get as many people as you can. So I don't think it's harmful for us to imagine that we could bring in them. But it's funny, I wonder what you all think about you know, it's never exchanged, but it's maybe hinted at. If Luke found out that his dad was the chosen one, I don't think he ever does, but like, would this help him? Because I'm sure that Obi-Wan never really does exchange that there's this the chosen one. But that seems to be the running line throughout the prequels, is that how can this be like a thing that almost twists you? Obi-Wan does it on purpose, that like he doesn't tell him. This is what I think, but I wonder what you guys think. That he doesn't even say that Luke is the chosen one. Even while Luke's flying away, he's like, that boy is our last hope. And Yoda's like, no, there's another. Like it's almost like they're like hiding it from him this time, whereas they knew it didn't work with Anakin. Oh, this little boy was told that, and now he's just becoming a little monster, right? Oh, what do you guys think?
What do you think, Brian? I'll let you go first.
Yeah, I don't know that they're necessarily hiding it from him any more so than they've hid everything else from him. So maybe they're kind of just hedging their bets. Maybe I don't know. There on that. It is interesting because yeah, they do make a very big deal about Anakin being the chosen one, and um, I think Anakin gets a little bit of that up front. They don't keep telling him. I don't think teenage Anakin. I don't think, hey, come here, chosen one. I don't think that's what they're doing. But behind closed doors and in the Jedi Council, they're certainly still having conversations about it. But knowing
Yeah.
that there are the two twins, they don't know. Which one is it Luke or is it Leia that is the chosen one? Was Anakin the chosen one? Hindsight, was he the one that brought balance to the Force? Maybe. I guess
Yeah.
everything is true from a certain point of view, but I don't think it really, behooved them to tell him that because the prophecy misread, may it have been, from that stance. So I don't know if
Yeah.
they still believed even that he was the chosen one, and I don't know that there would have been any benefit for them telling him that we thought your dad was the chosen one, but turns out we were wrong, or maybe we're not. Maybe we were right. I don't know. We're still not 100% sure on that. We just know that
Yeah.
he's a bad guy now. So
Yeah, and even like Anakin has moments where he's fighting with it, right? Like he killed all the Tusken Raiders, and he's like, I'm gonna be the most powerful Jedi in the galaxy. And Padme's just like, what? Like, what are you talking about? Like she's like confused, and he's just like, I killed them. I did all this. Like that's how he, like, I'm being held back. I'm being this, right? Like he's in this like ball of confusion again, right? Like, and so I feel like as a support, like Obi-Wan, this is how I feel, but once again, Cassia, you have an answer, but that it's almost like they still are kind of like, oh crap, we shouldn't have we should have let him know, but this dang Qui-Gon just let that slip, and the rest of his life is screwed. We can't even we can't take
Yeah.
that back. Pandora's box.
Yeah. I think Anakin knowing about the prophecy didn't help anyone. Um, and I think that's kind of like the point of prophecies is like in Greek mythology. I mean, we've kind of touched upon this in our Phantom Menace Hero's Journey episode, but um, it kind of evokes Greek tragedies. And it's like when people know about tragedies, they try to prevent it, which kind of like causes the prophecy in the first place.
Oedipus.
And
Yeah.
yeah, Oedipus Rex. And if you haven't read it, just read it. No spoilers, just read it. You'll thank me later. But um and to me, like Anakin in Attack of the Clones, he knows he's kind of special. He's kind of different. He was accepted into the Jedi Order at 9, which is very rare, and he doesn't really get along with like some of the other Jedi. Like he gets along with Obi-Wan and Palpatine. He kind of has Padme on a pedestal. And I think the chosen one prophecy and his powers went to his head. Maybe it would be different with if Qui-Gon were around, but Anakin in Attack of the Clones reminds me of like Achilles from the Iliad. Like he's just powerful, believes in his own drama, and didn't have access to therapy
Yeah.
and makes
Yeah.
it everyone else's problem.
Yeah, and he definitely in not having therapy and not having like a good support, Like, because Obi-Wan, I feel, is actually a good support for Luke, because he's kind of wiser. He's learned it. Whereas you're right, like Anakin just isn't accessing the best kind of stuff. Like you said, Padme's on a pedestal, Palpatine's on a pedestal, even Obi-Wan is on a pedestal. Like they're all just like above him. And his mother, well, she's almost the only one that he feels would have been honest with him. And even she's confused. There was no father, right? And then we basically
Mhm.
get confirmed in Revenge of the Sith. Like it's so indirect, but it was actually like part of the deleted dialogue that Palpatine just flat out tells him, I'm your dad, man. I made you. And it's funny because then that ties into the sequel trilogy, right? That really this is still family. Everybody's like, oh, Palpatine, who cares about this family? It does actually make sense that Rey is a Palpatine, because now she still is a Skywalker, really. They are like very linked. They're in this twisted, codependent, addictive relationship of power and lust and who knows what else, that's in it. But
Yeah, so Anakin kind of screws up. And did you have any, do you think like Padme trauma bonded to Anakin? Because I'm
yeah,
kind of like, why would she, after Anakin kind of tells her what he did to the Tusken, she's like, I love you. Before we die, I just want you to know, and then marry him?
yeah. Well, I don't know. That's a good question. I'm curious about you, Brian. Like what you think, like if you're consulting on this and you're hearing, all of this stuff about this dad and mom, and you're like, holy crap, like was this a real marriage? Like what would you think?
Yeah.
Well, was this a healthy marriage, I should say. Not a real marriage,
Uh,
you know what I mean?
I think that there would be some questions to be asked about the marriage and the dynamics of it. I think,
Yeah.
I it's certainly Anakin, he, like you said, Cassia has put her up on a pedestal, and we'll definitely get into that as we go through kind of the mythology here of the Phantom Menace here, and not too long, hopefully in an episode coming up soon. But um, why would she kind of overlook those things from Anakin. Considering at that point they weren't even together yet, so that seems like a pretty big red flag, Padme.
Yeah. Yeah. Bad.
So uh, yeah, I don't know. I don't know if maybe um, I don't know, because clearly I think Anakin, um, like we'd mentioned, had viewed Obi-Wan as a father figure, even though he wasn't. And I think he might have viewed Padme as some sort of motherly figure, even though she wasn't. But, um, in this instance, that's the only thing that would really make any sense, is if she viewed it as kind of this familial, like, you know, uh, y- love that only happens within family, right? It's where you're going to love someone no matter what, right? It's not an earned love like you have in like a a romantic relationship. It's the loving bond of between like family members and stuff like that. So it's very interesting to think
Yeah.
about how that relationship got off the ground in the first place.
Yeah, and that may be flaws in the writing. We could sit down and say that we say, oh, now we're seeing it, and maybe even like what people could complain about, that's in prequels or the sequel trilogies, that there's not enough answers to the confusion of like, why would these two get together? But I always love moments where we are intrigued of like, how in the world could she stay with him? I like that we can sit there and be there like, why would she even cling to him? I do like the trauma bond, Cassia, of like
Mhm.
that's in there, but like this thing of like, yeah, this undying love, Brian, that you're talking about, like that they're connected. Like, who else is there? Things are falling apart. I think they both clearly know that it's this unbridled thing. There's something very fascinating about love and how it feels, and that's why there's been a lot of people that have argued like, oh, that's lust, or that's this, that's that, and that we maybe don't have a right as therapists to sit there and be like, well, Luke, your dad was in this loveless marriage or something, or at least your mom was, right? Your mom was in a loveless marriage.
Yeah.
He probably felt loved. He felt loved, but she didn't. She felt kind of possessed, or like confused. But yeah, it's a hard thing to answer, and I think that's where I'm saying that there is like something that you can trust in, like that Obi-Wan, he's trying to tell the story. He's almost frequently trying to figure out what's going on, and he obviously knows that this is happening. So that's another confusion that we have, is like, how could Yoda and Obi-Wan not know they were married? Are they really that dumb? And that's where we might get into the mythos of this, of like lies and the power of lies and secrets and what they do, and that you sometimes just don't want to get caught up in them. That you're like, oh gosh, dude, like you're doing something that's wrong. My mom visited recently, and she was helping us out here. So my dad wasn't here. It was just my mom, but she brought up a great question that I think my dad would have agreed to ask, which is this question of like, how did I not know all of these things that happened with my kids that you guys are now revealing to me? How did I not know? Like, what was going on? So, Cassia, you're right. Like, there's something here about war, that like you really get distracted with this. But then too, Brian, you get distracted with family, that you're like, this is all I've got, so I'm going to cling to it. So, like we look at the Dark Ages and people say, how the heck did that happen? Or they look at, the Nazis, the Nazi regime. How did that happen? Well, in a lot of ways, it was belonging. The things that you get for belonging. And these are very, mental health things, right? Like we help people understand where they belong, where they want to do this. And like, if you bring in a support network that's like, hey, do we really belong? And they just bring in more confusion. Yeah, you probably need to bring in other support. And that's where I do feel like if we were to transition right now, that if we were like, and I do think that it's a fitting thing that a lot of people are like, if you watch them chronologically, you still are going to come away with Revenge of the Sith and be like, whoa, I need some more answers here. And I do feel like the sequel trilogy tries to answer some of these questions of like, how do people fall in love? How do they stay in love? Is it all about family? Is it about this? Can strangers come together and, make sense out of war? Like you said, Cassia, like World War III, right? Like it's like, dang, can people survive in trauma? Can they do more than survive is more of the question.
Maybe the original sin for Star Wars is separating Anakin from Shmi, because we
Yeah.
just kind of see how Anakin deteriorates, especially in Attack of the Clones, and then Revenge of the Sith. I guess you could call it a hero's journey for a villain, like he kind of goes through the steps, but they're all kind of like for the wrong side.
Mm-hmm. And where's Padme's parents too, right? It's deleted scenes.
Deleted scenes, sadly, and she died of sadness. So if
That's right.
therapy and women's health existed in Star Wars, maybe Star Wars wouldn't have happened. But
She was she, there was a lot of sadness going on. Yeah, definitely. The original sin was that separation, and then Qui-Gon not being there to play that kind of parental role that Anakin so desperately needed. Throughout the story there, because we see him at the end of the Phantom Menace. He's a pretty good kid. He seems pretty modest by all accounts. Well skilled, and then we pick back up in Attack of the Clones, and he's kind of bought into his own mythology there. So it's an interesting kind of tragic tale there for that. And yeah, I think Obi-Wan really is kind of the backbone of really understanding kind of the rise and fall of Anakin Skywalker, I think.
Yeah. Yeah. His certain point of view. There's just so many things that are like heartbreaking for what he's telling, because like I said, even just like the lightsaber thing is like, okay, well, did he really want you to have that? I don't know. maybe
Yeah.
the best wishes of what he had. And so that's where a mental health thing that I'd like to bring up with you guys that does come up is that there's a thing that we gauge with people, and I don't want this to be judgmental when you hear this, that it's like it's something that like if you don't have this, you got real big problems. But to look on the past and to really see it in a positive light, no matter its confusion, is actually a very healthy thing to do, to like pull out of it and be like, okay, I had a terrible childhood or something, or I had a hard childhood is more what you'd say, but I'm me. Because of my past, I'm me. And I wonder what you two think about that for yourselves, but also just on like the Star Wars side of this Skywalker legacy, and pulling out of it and recognizing somebody, like no matter how hard things are.
Yeah, I think that is a difficult thing for people to grapple with. There are some things like from my past, like I would have loved to have been different, but I am who I am because of my past, and I I went on the journey as I went on it, and if like I tried to time travel and tell myself what to do in the past, I would have been like, "You're wrong, you're stupid, and I don't like your shoes, so obviously you're wrong," and then probably doubled down on what I was doing. Like we
Yeah.
have to give ourselves grace, and where we can give others grace too. Um, in some cases, maybe it came out of like um, people thought they were doing what was best for us, and if they weren't doing what was best for us, like uh, we know that now, and we can recognize it.
Yeah. Yeah,
Mhm.
the recognition of it.
Yeah, I think there's a really kind of clear line drawn. Um, when you look at something like the opera scene in Revenge of the Sith, where um, Anakin is talking to Palpatine there, and Palpatine keeps drudging up, kind of the ghosts of the past, whereas the Jedi are trying to kind of move forward, and even there, at the end, it kind of springs immediately into action by Yoda and Obi-Wan into, okay, well, that's happened now. What do we do next? Whereas, George Lucas and the embodiment of evil there, and Palpatine is, a character who is very content to dwell on, the misdeeds of the past, and, keep those, regurgitating within Anakin, and, boiling up to the surface. He's never able to move on, from Shmi, from the Tusken Raiders, from these visions of losing Padme, and his his thoughts dwell on his mother, all that stuff. And
Yeah.
Palpatine can hone in on that as an agent of evil, as it were, to keep him stuck in that past, right, just churning around in it.
Yeah, yeah, I like that it's like not only can you uh recognize the past, like, oh, what's happened and stuff like that, but like, yeah, when you do some of the recognition and stuff, like it's there's positive and negative, and if you have more negative out of it, yeah, you're probably gonna it's not gonna bode as well as it could when you're like, okay. I like that. I like the perspective, Brian, that like Palpatine is really good at doing this. He is a puppeteer, and it's supposed to sound like that, right? Palpatine is supposed to sound like a puppeteer, right? The Palpatine puppeteer, and he's the one that's like trying to manipulate everyone around him, and he doesn't want it to be seen as good. He wants it to be seen as a constant, like I said, that first thing of like trying to find something that isn't confusing. And so I think it's an ultimate thing that when you return in your mind back to what Luke experienced, that Darth Vader is suddenly, Cassie, you had talked about it, that he's sitting there with what he's done. It's sad. Like he was completely fooled into doing these things. Like he even says to Luke, it's too late for me. It's too late. It's never too late is the answer that's healthier from a mental health perspective that as much as you can look on the past and people say something like, yeah, my past sucks, it was hell, it's too late for me. It's never too late. You can be redeemed. And that's probably the piece that we see with Luke, is that he sees his father, which a lot of people find is stupid. They're like, that doesn't make any sense. But I think that is a very mental health, like a beautiful message. It's never too late for somebody to find peace in turmoil, in darkness and confusion. It's never too late to make sense out of things, even if you don't know everything.
Yeah, and sometimes that doesn't make sense, like from a logical perspective, but it is better to have hope. And I think Star Wars is about
Hope.
redemption and hope, you know?
Yeah. Yeah.
And yeah, it's better to kind of look towards the future and have things you're working on rather than like, kind of like the dark side. I think it's more about the past and kind of being scared of death, and like they can't become force ghosts, Uh they just kind of build on like their pain, but there's no like there's nothing behind it like growth. Like I think like the best Jedi take what happens to them but still move forward for their love of like humanity and the galaxy and their friends and family.
Yeah. Yeah. The nether realm of the Force, right? Like that would be so much fun to explore that. I think George Lucas is probably hoping to explore it more in the sequel trilogy.
Yeah.
The Force ghosts and stuff. Even Colin Trevorrow, right? His treatment for Duel of the Fates, which was what he saw Rise of Skywalker as, has more Force ghost Luke in it, right? He's
Yeah.
balancing something else. The last message of Luke in Last Jedi, right? See you around, kid. And it's like, oh, I really did want Kylo Ren to see him around, but maybe he is a Force ghost in the end, or something like that. Like that they, or
Yeah.
maybe not. I don't know.
Yeah, it would have been interesting, like, because to kind of get like you kind of have the father's trilogy, the prequels, and then the son's trilogy, which is the original trilogy,
Yeah.
Luke's story, and then I think like the Lucas's sequel trilogy, even though there is a lot of overlap with what happened, was gonna kind of examine like kind of like the Force and the midichlorians,
Hmm.
and like kind of be like the spirit, I guess, but that didn't happen. Maybe it can still happen in other ways, but it's
Yeah.
interesting.
Yeah, it seems like that JJ was willing to touch on it. Like, because even like the original concepts for that first one that George Lucas had in mind, Rise of Skywalker goes to, like, oh, they find the Death Star remains, right? They do have like something there that's like, okay, oh, there was a female lead, and there was going to be a stormtrooper character more explored in George Lucas's ideas of what he wanted. And so I do feel like, the Force is still there. It's just Disney always has this thing that they've got. I that's like, hey, yeah, we can't just do a trilogy. We can't just end in episode 9. Make sure that we still have, their most recent announcement, right? You will see Rey again, right? Like she will come
Yeah.
back. So there could be some great hope here. Just like I love Rogue One. It's not an episodic film, but I think that it is the most Star Wars out of
Yeah.
all of their work. So if
Yeah.
there's another film with Rey in it that's like Rogue One, I'm okay with that. That's good. It can have this exploration, but I do think still that there's a good job done.
I guess like what I'll say before we kind of tap into what some of our listeners and friends like have contributed is like I think the prequels like kind of seeing Anakin separated from Shmi and like the impact that has on Attack of the Clones and Revenge of the Sith like is a good mental health case study of what not to do,
Yeah, yeah,
and there are so many lessons in the Dagobah cave that we can always come back to, and there are many, like in the future we can learn more about Kylo Ren and Ben, some of the trauma like he goes through, and some of that he might have brought it on himself, but like uh like life happens. But I do like how the sequel trilogy tackles found family.
Hmm.
And if
Hmm.
you haven't seen Kenobi, I loved how Reva's story unfolded, especially the conclusion, where it was kind of more hopeful.
Yeah.
Yeah, for
Yeah.
sure.
There is, there is, I don't like, to dog on the sequel trilogy. It breaks my heart. It's just like this new Indiana Jones that doesn't have Spielberg with it, right? Like, what would have been like with to have these original artists in here, and did they understand the mental health impact? I do think that people are striving to, and so there is still really good. Like, there's a beautiful moment, and I will say it's very therapeutic, where Han, confronts in memory what Kylo does, right? Like at Rise of Skywalker, that it repeats the exact same pace, the moment of what happens in The Force Awakens, right? It's just it actually is what he preferred it to be, right? The memory of it. And it's like this closure to trauma of like what he wanted. He wanted his real dad. He didn't want his uncle. He probably would have been better off to be with his parents than to be, given to his uncle. And that's still the family thing, right? That we're like, we just want people, if like, we want to be belonging to them. We don't want to be neglected. That's maybe where Han is more the neglectful father. But anyways,
Yeah, we will definitely cover the sequel trilogy. No, just kidding. We will definitely cover the sequel trilogy because there's a lot to go over, but sometimes it's kind of like the original trilogy and the prequel trilogy. I guess that's what uh Lucas kind of worked on, and then we can always kind of like I think there's lots of lessons to learn, and then like can kind of just expand more on that. But
Hmm.
did you kind of have some things to from our listeners and friends of the pod?
Yeah, yeah, absolutely, I do. And just to touch on that, I actually think it'll be interesting and perhaps even a little bit easier to look at the sequel trilogy because I have so much history with the original trilogy and the prequel trilogy and all of the supplemental material, and we're still kind of waiting for that for the sequel trilogy. So we really only have the films to go off of there. So it might be a little different kind
Yeah.
of conversation about those. So. But yeah, we definitely got some good feedback here from some friends and patrons and other podcasters and things here about just kind of Star Wars and mental health. I think Cassia, you threw this out to a couple of people on our Discord. So let's pull this one up here. We've got Nelson. Uh, See, Nelson says there could easily be some Jedi cognitive behavioral therapy crossover. Lucas describes himself as a Buddhist Methodist, a mix between Buddhism and Methodist Christianity, with him stating explicitly in some interviews that Jedi were based off of Buddhist warrior monks. The EU likes to throw Stoicism into the mix for Jedi as well. Cognitive behavioral therapy has its roots in Stoicism and some Buddhist practices. That might be interesting rabbit hole to go down.
mhm.
So what do you think, Ian? Cassia, what do you think? Kind of the kind of what Nelson says here about kind of this cognitive behavioral therapy and its roots there, and kind of goes back into George Lucas. But I guess just to look at the Jedi kind of as a whole, do we see anything kind of therapeutic in the way that the Jedi were kind of originally structured, and we actually get kind of more stuff about the Jedi, especially in that EU section, because we didn't get a lot about the Jedi Order and the way the Jedi operated in the original trilogy. We had to wait for the prequel trilogy for that. So
Stoicism itself, the endurance of pain or hardship without the display of feelings and without complaint. I'm sorry, I'm not as familiar with. So I totally looked up the the definition here, but cognitive behavior therapy I am more familiar with, and a lot of what it invites is that you don't, like, for example, stop dwelling on the past, right? And
mhm.
they constantly are telling him to stop um, don't get stuck on who your father is. Don't get stuck on your mother, right? You're away from your mother right now. Obi-Wan was taken away from his parents, right? And it's almost hinted at maybe Owen, Uncle Owen is his brother, right? We have these kind of things, right? Like, so the family is the answer all the time in family systems, right? Like it's inside. But cognitive behavior therapy is like, so what? It says that question. So what if they're an answer? There's other answers. And so stoicism itself too is kind of on that thing that, like, okay, don't get stuck on the hardship of it, and don't get stuck on all these kind of things. Like, move on. And you don't have to have these kind of you need to set goals for the new future, right? And Luke's goals, they are very ambitious, right? But even Yoda like pulls him back constantly, so it's very confusing in my opinion on that level. So that's why I still feel like there's a lot of like why systems works better for them is that it addresses the confusion. Because if we're to talk about cognitive behavior therapy, Yoda criticizes him for his goals. Whereas we as an audience are kind of like, wait a second, that was the best part. Like, we felt that moment where Luke is looking at the binary sunset and John Williams' score is playing. Yoda mocks it. And he's like, all you're ever doing is looking for it. That's not how a Jedi is. And it's like, well, do you understand what a Jedi is? And then you find out, yeah, I guess Anakin didn't understand either, right? He understood that passion and compassion are the same thing. And so I always wanted them to explore even the sequel trilogy. I feel like they did a bit that maybe these two should be one and the same thing. You should be filled with passion and compassion. And maybe a cognitive behavior therapy approach can be to have a new goal that's set up with these kind of two things instead of any criticism of them, that we can put away the criticism, put that into the past instead. I don't know. Cassia, what about you?
Yeah, I mean, I guess I like stoicism, not like to the extreme, but kind of like, if you've ever read Meditations by Marcus Aurelius, like Marcus Aurelius was an emperor who wrote down a lot of his thoughts in a journal, and that's where we get Meditations from. But I think like with Star Wars, the Jedi are good, but when they're kind of like a system that like is kind of more concerned, like, what does the council think? How would this impact our image in the Senate and our political standing? I think that's where the Jedi's problems came from. Like, when like it was more just a system, like the Jedi serve the system rather than like a system to benefit the Jedi. So like anything can be a system, anything can be like, well, most things I should say can be good or bad. It
Yeah,
just is like depends on the degree, I think.
yeah,
And I think like if what you kind of like believe and like kind of imbibe, I guess, is positive, I think like you can kind of see yourself in the Jedi teachings.
mhm,
Hmm. Yeah, we see a lot of that within Qui-Gon, kind of taking up the helm and the Phantom Menace, very, very calm, and basically makes the declaration, that he's not there to fight the war for, Queen Amidala. He's not there to rescue slaves. He's just, living his life, within the realms and confines of this ideology that he has. And then tying that back into, kind of this um, Buddhist and Methodist Christianity, that's, like any kind of religion or, way of thinking, is that everyone will interpret it a little bit differently. And we definitely see that, throughout, the saga and the way that the Jedi are kind of interpreting and the directions that they're giving. And, everyone has kind of their own ideas for that. So that's what I see there on that. Let's see. So next up, we've got Michaela, who is one of the co-hosts on the very excellent Drink the Movies podcast. So go give that a listen. But she says, to be honest, I wonder about the idea that a Jedi has to rise above emotion to reach their higher self and become one with the Force. Does that
yeah.
mean that emotions keep us from being one with the Force? And the fact that Anakin failed because, or quote unquote, failed because he fell in love and married, all while being the most powerful Jedi. What does that say about humans? That no matter how much we try to separate from our emotions, it's a useless endeavor? And what about that love that Luke still has for his father? That's his great strength at the end that spawns the same emotion from Vader. So maybe feeling too much or at all isn't the thing that keeps us from the Force after all. Just an idea.
Yeah, I mean that's why, like I said, the Force is not the system of Star Wars; it's the family. Um, so if we're to take back even more so than the consultant thing, that we're just looking at Star Wars from like a better mental health perspective, the system of the family is better. That's how I would interpret what she's talking about there. Is that yeah, the Force is being understood in ways that are probably incorrect, but from a standpoint which we're really truly introduced, that George Lucas especially writes about, the family is the thing that matters the most. It's the thing that keeps on pulling them together, right? It's the thing that makes Obi-Wan into a better person, is that he ends up, what I would say, having compassion, love, and interest in Luke, right? Because he could have just been like, whatever, he's with his family. But he continues to want to share the Force with him because of something more than just, well, it's my belief system. Like, he has something inside of him that's like, he deserves more. He deserves something that he saw once in his father, right? And we could sit there and say it's because it's destiny or it's the chosen one thing. But I think there's just, yeah, the real system is that he actually feels akin to Luke, this little baby that he held in his hands, right? Like, that he was put in charge of as a ward, right? Like, you fall in love with these people in your life. Fall in love in multiple ways, I should say, not just romantically. But yeah, I just, that's why I think that you can't just inside the box of therapy or mental health be like, oh, okay, let's talk about the Force, right? Like, well, that's like talking about just somebody's religion, because there's so much more than just that. Or even, and I don't want this to be offensive to any listener, but even just like people's preferences or identities. There's multitude of things that we bring in, but I feel that the origin of everything, right? Like, we're born into families is important.
It's all about family.
That's right. It is all about family, and Anakin even says kind of as much to Padme, and kind of their section of the film there where they're kind of having this courtship sort of thing, and he basically breaks down that Jedi are encouraged to love right from his kind of point of view on the way that he's been taught, and yeah, I think ultimately that love, like as you mentioned, there's lots of different varieties of love, right? Obviously, if you have romantic love there between Anakin and Padme, but the love of family, father and son, mother and daughter, mother and son, all of those, relationships, and that
Yeah.
love is just as important to the Jedi that we see, and that's kind of one of the fatal mistakes I think we see within the Jedi, in their kind of dogmatic approach to the way that they're seeing relationships and maintaining them throughout the saga is pretty important to the story. So
Yeah.
let's see, Al, who was on our episode talking about the Last of Us, right? Yeah.
Hmm.
Let's see. He says, I don't know. I'm not a great resource on this. Like, some might argue that the Jedi ways were not good for Anakin's mentality, but it was working well for other Jedi for the longest time ever. It's just that Anakin seriously disrupted the Jedi Order when his mental health broke, but also he wasn't really supposed to be a Jedi. So that's pretty interesting take, Al, and those are some pretty good
Yeah.
points, I think. So
Yeah. Was this good for him? I had a girlfriend once say to me about my faith, which I still practice a specific faith. But she said to me, I don't know if your faith is good for you. And I actually appreciated her sharing that with me, because that made me really ponder it, right? And like, yeah, is being a Jedi good for Anakin? If Qui-Gon had never shown up, what would have happened to Anakin? Like, do we wonder? I think that inevitably he would have been captured, by the dark side of the Force, right? Like that. Okay, so if he doesn't, be infiltrated into the Jedi Order, maybe that's what Palpatine was trying to do. Maybe he falsified, the prophecies or anything like this, or maybe they would have just found another chosen one elsewhere, or maybe
Yeah.
Anakin would have been the protege in a political way for Palpatine, right? On the planet Tatooine or something like that would have happened, and maybe that's what they would have pinned it against, because they were definitely like making it, like you were saying, Cassia, that the politics, or I think it was you, Cassia, that said this. I apologize. It's getting late, but that the politics were a part of the Jedi, and it's like, well, that shouldn't have happened, right? And so maybe no matter what, Palpatine was puppeteering it all as that he couldn't fail. He was going to bring in this character no matter what into the lives of these people. And so like it didn't matter if he became a Jedi or not, he was going to disrupt whatever order was going on. And that's kind of heartbreaking, but what's also even heartbreaking is what we've talked about, like father figures in our lives. Shmei never knew the husband, right? So like what happened? Like this is really weird. It's almost like I don't want to say this, but it's almost like she got raped, right? Like what, she has no idea what happened to her. It's just like boom. And people will connect that to Christianity. They might say, like with Jesus of
Virgin
Nazareth.
birth.
That's right, the virgin birth, right? But
Mm.
like I feel like this is more twisted. I feel like this is more like a play on that George Lucas had, and Anakin himself, like did this fit with him? I think he was just a puppet. And so it didn't matter what fit with him. Nothing really fit with him other than a family, becoming a dad. I love the movie Hook, and I know you two have probably watched it. And there's that moment, right, where Peter Pan finds out his like how his happiness, right, to return to being Peter Pan is, I'm a daddy. I'm a daddy. And when I became a dad, it does something that melts you, it melts this part of you. And so no matter what, like Palpatine's like, ha ha ha, I'm going to manipulate everybody and I'm going to do this. And it doesn't matter if the Jedi are not good for Anakin. What's the truth is that Anakin just wanted a dad, and he kind of got that out of Palpatine. And so no matter what, he's always looking for it. And he's like, I want to do this. So family always like conquers in that way. So it doesn't matter what he believes, what conquered more is what is family. It's this love. It's this, what you talk about, Brian, right? Like this undying love, even that even like Padme probably had, like, hey, there's nobody else in my life. I'm going to forgive you for something that's weird and very evil.
Right. Yeah, exactly. And yeah, Al does bring up some good points there. And, that, the Jedi had been operating, kind of under that same structure for a super long time. Certainly he wasn't the first that had feelings for someone else that had to get pushed to the side. Look at his mentor there. But I think yeah, it's really it's just kind of this tinderbox that Palpatine had set up, and that's really kind of the catalyst for all of this. It's not really so much that Anakin fell in love with Padme and couldn't cope with those emotions so much as it is just kind of just put into this like I said, kind of on this little tinder pile just ready to catch on fire.
Yeah.
There because of kind of Palpatine pulling the strings on all of it. And had that not been the case, would everything have worked out okay? It's hard to say for sure, but
I think
there
was always just a puppeteer, right?
Yeah.
And people tried to do this weird thing that's like I said, I mean, I keep on harping on it, but it's something outside of the family that we do. So this is a theory, obviously, and so other people have the theories, but you just can't destroy it. You can't, like, families have been around forever. And so people try to work against it, but it can't.
Exactly. Very much so. So thank you, Al, for that. And then we just have a kind of two like little kind of meme things here that Cassia sent over to me that we thought would be good just to throw in here. And someone, it looks like on Twitter, had said, listening to a dad in a coffee shop explains to a 4-year-old that Darth Vader was a man with a lot of big feelings who didn't have anyone to help him express them in the right way. And then there's the meme with like the big giant book and the little book, and it says Star Wars, and then Star Wars if Anakin had a therapist. So yeah, would a therapy session with Anakin, would that have done the trick? Would that have saved us the trouble of having the war in the stars in the first place?
I
But
kind of think so, or at least
yeah,
having Qui-Gon around would have made things maybe a little bit more positive.
yeah. I mean, what is a therapist? You know, it's a third person who is trying to be unbiased. I feel like Qui-Gon was not a part of the family. He was a break in that. So Cassia, you're right. You had mentioned that before, right? Like if Qui-Gon had showed up, or even if Anakin had therapy, it's just it's a break in the family, right? And that's why even Finn, who's in the sequel trilogy too, right, is like a good fit for Rey. I actually like that's commendable fit for the character. If we really do look at things from Finn's perspective, people are like, oh, he's just like yelling at her and he's doing this. He's actually a voice of reason, and that's a lot of what Qui-Gon is too, right? Like he's brought up in Attack of the Clones, and he says Qui-Gon would have never have joined you. Obi-Wan is actually telling the truth. Qui-Gon never would have joined Count Dooku. So these people sit there and understand, oh, no, yes, he would have. He was my Padawan, like I'm the puppet master. And Qui-Gon was like this amazing figure he was really striving to be unbiased. And he was somebody who was more concerned with a prophecy that other people were not concerned in. Prophecy misread, or, well, the prophecy says this, and what do you know? And, oh, the chosen one, the boy may be, nevertheless, he's dangerous. Qui-Gon just flat out was like, I don't care. I see something that is valuable in somebody, and that is therapeutic. That is, stoicism is endurance, like we were talking about, right? That is the enduring factor that would have changed somebody's life. And that did, because even Luke did that, right?
Yeah.
Tell your sister you were right. It's not too late. It's not too late to change.
Yeah. And then I had some feedback, and some of these I think I'll save for a future sequel trilogy episode, but my cousin was telling me, my cousin Tyler, my favorite thing about Star Wars is that it celebrates individuality and freedom, overcoming oppression, finding peace. Star Wars is always slaying me. Then I'm just kind of um, reading this also from my cousin Emily, and she said, "I think Star Wars teaches people not to give up, no
Yeah.
matter what. We are all important beings in the galaxy." I think
Yeah.
it does. I think what it does really well is portraying what it's like to feel alone in such a big world, but
Mhm.
that we can find people that care for us and will be on our team. I think, and she was adding, I think it could do a better job on showing people how to communicate. When things get hard, it could show people to work as a team rather than acting alone.
Yeah. I mean, that's Star Trek though. So, kidding. I'm just kidding. But I do like that invitation though, that like could we show even like the idea of the Jedi, like could we show it being more of a healthy family orientation? Maybe if they do, like this trilogy or something like that in the past, of like I've always wanted to see that, right? Like Qui-Gon and Obi-Wan seem so functional. They
Yeah.
may have doubted each other, but they were like, we almost hunger for it, right? Um, it seems like what people are waiting for. So that's a good invitation, because even the sequel trilogy kind of bounces back to like these very unhealthy conversations to have. Like poor Han, right? Like I don't think he was a neglectful father. I just think he thought he was a screw up. He thought he was a screw up all of his life, right? And
Yeah.
and like Princess Leia, like dang, she's a princess, right? Like how can you live up to this thing, and or not that, sorry, thing, but this person, but live up to that title or anything.
Mhm.
So yeah, more of a team thing. I actually really like how messy it is, because that's just kind of everybody's life. Like I said,
Hmm.
everybody who comes in has pretty frequent questions, right? As a family, are we doing this right? and people come in and they just say, I'm confused. I don't know what's wrong. I know something's wrong, but I don't know what's wrong. So it's therapeutic in that way because then you're familiar, right? But I do think that it's healthy though to show something that isn't confusing. So yeah, I want more of Obi-Wan Qui-Gon.
Hmm.
Yeah, for sure.
As much as the original trilogy, and I think the sequel trilogy and stuff like Rebels is, really dialed in on kind of this theme of found family. The prequels is more a story of barriers to families, in
Mm,
that sense. So it's kind of the flip sides of the coin, there between the prequel and the original trilogy, I think.
yeah.
Yeah. And then I'll save a couple of the thoughts for next time, but I'll just finish up uh with a thought from, or a few thoughts really, from my friend Avery. I kind of asked her, and she said, I'm sure there's something to say about Anakin and the trauma he experienced in his life and how PTSD over losing his mother may have influenced his decisions to follow the dark side in an attempt to save Padme. And she said there are lots of characters with trauma to unpack. And then uh, she said this isn't exactly mental health, but Han Solo's indoctrination in the ways of toxic masculinity
Mm,
damage relationships and his family's sense of security and his love that causes problems and maybe contributed to mental health issues in Kylo. And I
yeah.
said, thanks. Sometimes it takes someone not immersed in the movies to see the interesting truths. And she also added, like, also a lot of characters with hermit lifestyles that's gonna mess with them somehow. Uh, which like after Corona, I'm like, yeah, um, hits a little hard. But then I asked
Yeah.
her, like, what do you think shows and movies should do regarding mental health in general? And she said, I think they probably need to show examples of how to support those with mental health issues, show examples of advocating and helping where needed, but also setting healthy boundaries as needed. We talk about supporting people and all agree, but we don't always get a lot of examples of how to do that as individuals in a world where professional help can mean needing a decent amount of money.
That's definitely why, like I said, one of the invitations that you have from Confusion, to get as much information as you can. The next step of that is like, okay, well, what support do you have in your life, right? That's very family based, right? We're gonna try to ask as many questions as we can, get lineal answers, and then move to circular questions, which is, okay, well, what would that person say in your life, right? Support. So yeah, as much as you can get, and if you're not, you know, if you're still confused, keep looking for more people. But yeah, it's an interesting thing. I like what's brought up there about the masculinity that Han Solo has, because it's like, yeah, it's kind of heartbreaking, and we probably do want something a little bit more healthy that's on display here, of somebody who really did do something right. When I was a young kid, I thought that that's what Obi-Wan was he was the one that was doing everything right. But even him, he was having a false portrayal of something that's like, well, you're not being very supportive. Like, Anakin is dying here, right? Like, he is emotionally dying, and you don't really even care. They end up using him as a puppet as well. Like, these are
Yeah.
not good things. And then, I don't understand my son. So Han pushes him away. Like, oh, get your uncle to do something, right? Like, that's so heartbreaking. Like, with people who are dealing with addiction, and they say, go see a therapist, or get this family member to talk to you, right? Like, that's very heartbreaking. Not even just addiction, but doubt. Go talk to somebody else, right? That's very heartbreaking. Like, I came to you and you're like, get away from me. So
Yeah. That's a good point you bring up about Obi-Wan, because I think a lot of people maybe watched the prequels a couple times, but they're like, how did Yoda not know that Palpatine was in charge of the Senate and manipulating everyone? And I was like, I think like Obi-Wan and Yoda are good metaphorical people because Yoda is a certain species that I don't know what he is, but um, we'll never know. But I think they're doing the best they can. But if you kind of see them, they're kind of more just being Jedis in a system. Uh, and you kind of see them make mistakes, even though they're good people. And I think um, maybe that's not something that's made as overt as it could have been, but we see that Yoda and Obi-Wan, even though they made mistakes in the prequel trilogy, um, that they learned from them, and I think they do a better job in the original trilogy. And I think that's a good lesson is like sometimes patterns repeat themselves, but if we recognize them and kind of like with time and hard work, we can become better. What do you guys think?
Yeah, absolutely. We're we're saving the sequel trilogy, but failure the greatest teacher is, says Yoda. So yeah, it's important to learn those lessons, and it's hard to say why they would have missed Palpatine. I mean, clearly he was very good at pulling the strings here on this story. So maybe it was the hubris of the Jedi,
Yeah.
like Luke says, or maybe there were other underlying factors there that we don't get to see in the movie behind those closed Jedi Council doors. But yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely.
Yeah,
Yeah.
they definitely have like when you're aware of patterns, that alleviates confusion, right? And especially when you can bring in more people, like I've said this whole time, I'm harping on the same thing, that also affirm the patterns happening for them. Like, yeah, that's kind of what I'm experiencing as well. And even if you can get them to describe the pattern differently, right? Like it's going to relieve a lot of this confusion and bring out something that's like, okay, yeah, let's stop this. And so yeah, their hubris, right? They didn't recognize the pattern is what Luke's looking at, right? Like Palpatine did. He was like, oh, you idiots. I can manipulate you so easily. You don't even realize what you're doing. That's so, like they're policing the galaxy. Like what a waste of time. Like let a politician do that because a politician, that's what he thought was let a politician do that. And so then he's like, oh, I'll just do that. I'll just become a politician, which is just as good as a Sith. Sorry, that sounds really rude, but I guess in their world.
Yeah,
Yeah.
for sure.
And yeah, so we I think we kept up Brian like way past his bedtime. I owe him. Uh,
It's been great spending some time here talking about kind of Star Wars and the pull and the story structure and those kinds of things and the way that it plays into mental health and kind of taking a little bit of a deep dive here onto some of our characters and storylines of Star Wars, at least through the original trilogy and prequel trilogy with Ian today. I think this has been a really fun and interesting conversation. We've got into this a little bit before, Cassia, talking about stuff like the Skywalker Family at War book, and we kind of talked about some of these things, but not in the depth with the expertise of someone like Ian. So thank you so much for coming on. We definitely appreciate you having you on.
Oh, I love your guys' podcast. And
thanks.
I'm very honored to be on it. So like I said, there's just been so much in my life that's been busy, but aside from my professional life, I find this stuff is very healthy to talk about. Too many people get caught up in politics and even the religion or other things like that, and we can step back, and it can be very therapeutic to talk about something that doesn't matter in the grand scheme of things, but it is parallel to things that do matter. So it's a very wonderful, safe space. And so I'm happy to be here in that space with you guys.
There's that quote that I'm paraphrasing from someone. Maybe it's Pablo Picasso, but it's been said so many times that we can argue about who said it. But fiction is the lie that enables us to see the truth. And I
Beautiful.
don't know. I think it can help people to talk about a war in the stars, So,
Yeah. Yeah. It's
yeah.
beautiful. Awesome.
So, with all that, we'll be back soon, but may the force be with you.